All right, I said I would do a little bit of basic shading, and there are lots of videos out there in YouTube about shading, and you can find all sorts of things. I just want to do a couple of super simple basic. I know I do most of my shading, and I talk about shading as I go, as I'm drawing the Zentangles, because Zentangles can be super complex just because you're adding a lot of lines to your drawings most of the time. And so I wanted to break it down into more basic, simple type shapes to talk about shading. When you're shading, most of the time I choose to have, you can either, let me start over here. There are two ways that you can approach your shading. You can approach your shading as if you have just sort of a general all over, like the light is coming straight down, like you shining a flashlight straight down on your page. Actually, a flashlight probably would have helped me here in my descriptions, but anyway, like you're shining a light straight down on your page. So the shading is kind of just sort of general. Or you can have a directed light source as if the sun or the light is coming from a particular direction. And most of the time, just the way our eyes work and just from atmosphere, most of the time your light will be coming from the top of your objects, because most of the time your light source is going to be either a lamp or the sun or something which is above your object, and it will either be directly above or above and to the right or above and to the left. It's rare that your object will be lit from below. Usually that only happens at night when you have lighting where, you know, the light source is at the bottom and it's uplighting. Uplighting doesn't happen very often. It's not something that I think about very much. So since I don't think about it that way, most of my shading I do either from a general perspective or one with a particular light source. So for example, if I don't have a particular light source, if it's just sort of all around general, you can, with an object like a circle, you can just go around the whole outside of it. Okay? And then when you blend, it's just sort of general, and it's all around, and it's lighter in the middle. Let me zoom in on that because that's going to be, it's lighter in the middle. Whoop, too much. Went farther than the camera can focus. There you go. Lighter in the middle and darker right around the edge. And that's sort of just a general round-ish shading, right? If you have a specific light source, let's say the light is coming from here. Okay, if the light's coming from here, let's look at it there like there's a lamp. The light's coming from here. Over here on this side, it will be darker because the object is blocking the light coming from here. Okay, and at the same time, the light will be striking here, and it will be darker on the object here. So there's two kinds of shading. There's shading, which is this here, because as the light goes further around this object, it's darker back here and it's lighter up here. That makes it look more round. And then there's shadow, because it will cast a shadow, a darker shadow, because the light is coming from here and it will cast a shadow going this way. Does that make sense? It will do both. Now you could have, this is to this in this type of shading right here with a cast shadow like that and shaded like this, it looks like a ball. It has become a ball. If, for example, this isn't a ball, but there's light coming in and this is actually a hole, if the light's coming from here, you would actually have a dark on this side and it'd be a little more defined. It'll still be needed to be blended, but it'll be a little more defined. And you will have a hole instead, and the light's coming this way. And so the edge of the hole blocked the light, right? And now that's a hole. That's a round object. That's just sort of a generally shaded object, and that's a hole. And you could also shade a circle on the outside as well. Let me do one like that. In general, you could go around the outside of it. Also, general shading. Okay? There's no right or wrong way. It's just how you choose to represent the object. So those are 4 circles, all shaded differently. They're still flat circles, but depending on how you shade them is whether or not they look more 3D than others. Here is that tangled cubine, right? It's flat. It's a square with another square and a diagonal, right? It's flat. But if you shade it with one side darker and one side a little bit lighter, all of a sudden it becomes a cube. And depending on whether or not this middle part is light or dark, if you make this actually dark with your pen, it looks different than when it was white, right? It's still a flat object, but it's how it's shaded. Here I've drawn some simple overlapping shapes. I always shade where there's the overlap. Always. That one's overlapping that one. This one is overlapping this one. Right? And if there's a light source, the side away from the light source will create a deeper shadow than the side that's closer to the light source. So this one's further away. This one's not quite as far. This one is on top. And you know that because here is the brightest spot. Here is the really darkest spot. You know that those guys are all overlapping and have created a lot of shadow right in here. And you might even want to make it even darker. Right in that spot where the ones, they all converge. And the only reason for that is because when you have multiple things on top of each other, they create a darker shadow. See where my fingers are doing? The more fingers are on top of the other, the darker it is. That's all it is. It's basic, it's simple. It's not something that you have to be scared about. If you put graphite, if you put pencil where you don't want it, get your eraser out and erase it. Right? Try again. Do something different. Decide that maybe you didn't like the light source coming from there. Maybe for some unknown reason your light source is coming from the bottom. It's coming up this way. And so this would be dark here because that's overlapping. But this would be really bright, perhaps. Well, it's still, that's kind of odd. I'm not sure I can draw it that way. See, I have a hard time envisioning it coming that way. So what I would have to do is actually turn the whole thing upside down. And then make my light source coming from this way. Shade it. Because I can shade, I always think of my light from coming from the top. Shade it going this way. All right. And then turn it around. And now my light source is coming from the bottom. And see how that looks different than the first time I did it? Because I changed where the direction of my light. So now the dark parts are on a different side. As long as you're consistent with where your light is coming from, then it really doesn't matter whether you're lighting it from the top or the bottom. It doesn't make any difference. Just be consistent. Okay, let's go with this. Okay, simple rectangle, correct? Right? Simple rectangle. As soon as you put a little bit of shading on one side, just one side, and make sure your pencil touches your pen line, because if you have a gap there, it looks funny. But just that. And then, ooh, you can't see. And then a little bit of shading, a little bit of blending. Now all of a sudden it's more like a pipe, especially if you made these ends curved. If you had made these a curve, look at that. Now all of a sudden you've got a cylinder or a pipe or something. Because you've shaded one side. Oftentimes we'll have overlapping shapes like this, scallopy shapes. If you just do this part right here, blend it out. There you go. Now you've got a nice scallop. And often, wherever there are lines come together into a corner like this, it will be a little darker. So I will shade that a little bit darker. Like that. Okay? One more thing is something called a drop shadow. Here I did a bit of laced. You could shade this with a little bit of shading where it's going into the hole to indicate that it's gone, going down into that hole, right? Just a little bit, doesn't need much to give you that feeling. And then if the light is coming, let's say the light's coming from here, it would hit here. If this was actually coming up out of the paper, like a loop of string coming up out of the paper, if you just put, and you actually don't even really need the pencil, you could just use what's left on your blending stump, and you put from here to there. Now you've created a shadow. It's creating a cast shadow, and it looks like it's coming more up out of the paper. If you do it closer, let me show you. If you do it closer to it, it looks like it's not sticking up as far, right? If you do it further, it's got to still start and stop. If it goes way out like that, now it looks like it's really sticking up further out of the paper than it did before. It hasn't moved, it hasn't changed. All that's changed is the suggestion of this shadow. I didn't even put any pencil on the page. I just used what was left on the bottom of the stump. Those are just some tricks. I have a hard time figuring out exactly how. I can't show you how to shade every single tangle because that's what I do when I'm doing the different tangles. This is just sort of a general overview of how to think about shading, where to think about your light source. If it helps you to put, your light source on one side, what really helped me the most figuring out on where to put the shading, where my darks need to be, is to actually get a light source that creates a shadow, and put my finger up and say, where is my shadow going? Oops, you can't see that. Where is that shadow going? See, there's a light source. There's a light source over here. I got my lamp right there in the corner of my work surface, right? When I put my pencil down, look where the shadow is going. If I move my pencil, where do I see the light bounce? Where do I see the shadows? Where is it darker? Where is it lighter? Just observe, observe your own finger. Stick my finger here in this light source. Oops, now I've gone blurry because it doesn't know where to focus. But see where you can see the highlight right there, and it's a mid-tone right here, and it's darker right here, and then down here on the paper, it's casting a shadow. That's the same thing what you're doing when you do this. Here's your finger, right? That has light, just like I had my finger here. Same finger, right? Here is where it's darkest. The blender creates that medium tone, which is why you need the blender, right? That's the light part, right? And then, where was that shadow? It was like that, depending on where my finger is, but it was kind of like that. So the shadow is doing this, right? Coming out from the bottom of my finger, and it's doing something like that. Just observe, do some observation, do some experiments. All right, so there's that finger. Draw a fingernail in there, and now you've got a finger, and it's just light and dark. I didn't do anything hard. I just observed lights and darks. And that's the same thing with shading your Zentangles. Take your object, you know, draw it out, figure out. Let's do a little quickie little paradox here. Quickie little paradox. Okay, now decide, where is your light source? Where is your darks and your lights? Is it darker, deeper down in there? I think it is. That's how I see paradox. So I will put my dark here, right along that curve. And I will say that's where it becomes the darkest. Okay. Simple, like that. Just a little bit is all it needs to make it look like it's going deep down into that. Make it darker in there than it is anywhere else. You could also shade that same tangle, assuming something different. Okay, let me do one more and then I'll be done. But it's important to know that there is no really right or wrong. It's just that it helps. Let me do two, just so that I can leave one blank. And just to let you know, when you draw paradox, if you have some of them that are too far apart, like I think that's too far apart, just split it in half with your pen, right? Same with this one. I think it's too far apart. Just add a line in there. It's no big deal. Okay, that one's, they're kind of flat. That one's not flat because I've shaded it. The other way you can shade is to decide that where these come together is where it's darkest. Right here. So instead of it being the darkest here along this curve, which is what I did on this one, it's darkest here in the corners. They're both shaded and they're both shaded fine. But they look different, shaded differently. Can you really tell? I don't know if you can really tell a difference, but see, that one's flat. Not shading keeps your Zentangles flat. Shading gives them life, but it doesn't matter which way you decide your shading is going to go. Whether you decide it's going to go on this side of this line or on that, either way is perfectly acceptable. They just give slightly different looks. As long as you're consistent on your whole drawing, that you shade the same way, it's fine. Main thing is you want to make sure that you're blending your pencil. You make sure you're blending. See how there's that line? It needs to be blended. Otherwise it's just stark. As soon as you blend it, the whole thing looks different. Look how soft and pretty that is. You need that blending. That's it. That's all there is to it. And if you took this one and went on the outside of it, it would look completely different. Let's say we go on the outside of that. It's still a little flat, but the tangle is flat, but the tangle is on an object that's not flat, which is interesting too. All right, so I'm gonna leave you guys with this. It's just sort of a shading, I don't even want to say it's a tutorial. Explanation? I just want you to draw some simple shapes on your page. You know, take some super simple ones, not complicated whole tangles, but just super simple shapes. Do some circles, do some rice shapes, do some, you know, lines, some boxes, you know, simple shapes, and practice shading those. And as you become more confident with that, you'll feel more confident doing it on an actual tile with a pattern. And you'll see that sometimes I decide to shade the inside, sometimes I decide to shade the outside, sometimes I highlight the rice shapes, sometimes I highlight the line, sometimes I highlight the circle. You know, those choices are just kind of spur of the moment choices for me. They're not set in stone. And what I was trying to say is that, yes, there's some general rules about the way the light source is and shadows and shading and highlights, but in Zentangle, it doesn't matter which one you choose, whether you're choosing to highlight where your darks are and where your lights are not as important as that you have darks and lights. That's what's creating the movement and the depth in your tile. So anyway, this was going to be short and quick, and it turned out to be not so short and not so quick, but I hope it was informative, and that you take some of these lessons, practice them, and incorporate them into your tiles. It will make a difference. I promise you it will make a difference. I'll see you guys later. Bye.